Thank you. Philip, sorry to jump in.
I think I'm obliged to declare that I'm the unpaid parliamentary spokesman for the campaign against political correctness. In the strategic aims that Jess was talking about and the priority areas, one of them is employment, which includes in it treatment at work, including pay gaps. According to the ONS, there's a 9% pay gap for full-time workers in favour of men, and about a 7% pay gap for part-time workers in favour of women. I was just wondering how big a priority it was for the Commission, given what you've stated in your strategic aim priority areas, to eliminate those pay gaps.
Can I just address your point about political correctness to start off with? Because actually I'm really very keen that the Commission is not seen to represent only minorities or only extreme categories of citizens in this country, such as prisoners and terrorists, in relation to the work that we do on human rights. Because the Commission is here for everybody, all of our citizens. So answering your question very directly in relation to pay gap work, we have, in relation to the evidence that we've accumulated in our important research, Is Britain Fairer, looked at the position in relation to male pay gaps, particularly in relation to part-time work, as well as the pay gaps in relation to women. So I think in relation to our stated priorities, perhaps that doesn't come across, but the whole area of pay gaps is something that we're particularly keen to eliminate.
So could you tell me what the gender, disability and race pay gaps are in your organisation?
Not off the top of my head, but we'd be happy to provide the information to you separately afterwards. I would just like.
Well, if this is such a priority for the to eliminate these pay gaps across the country, and that you're striving to get all these organisations to take this seriously, you'd think that you would at least know what yours was off the top. I mean, you'd think that this was such a priority. The first thing you'd be doing is keeping a track on exactly what's happening in your own organisation, rather than having a sort of a.
One of the reasons that we're not.
You should know these figures for your own organisation off by heart. Surely, if it's that important.
We know. So let me answer the question. I think we know that we have perhaps a small pay gap. I don't know the answer, but I think I would pray in aid the fact that we are actually going through a huge reorganisation at the moment, and in relation to that reorganisation, we're hoping to eliminate any pay gap whatsoever. And as Rebecca said, we will, once that new operating model has been implemented, provide you with full details. But we should be an exemplar organisation. I completely agree with you. And I think we'd be unique if there wasn't a pay gap, but I would hope that we could eliminate it as much as possible.
Well, let me help you out.
Okay.
I mean, I've got the last figures for which I have, which are for March 2015. So I appreciate that we're a bit out of date with the last figures that seem to be available that I've got. But you had a gender pay gap of 1.2% for full-time workers and 6.8% for part-time workers. You had a 13.3% pay gap for disabled people, so you were paying non-disabled people more than you were paying disabled staff. And you had an 8.8% pay gap on race. So my point is, if an organisation like yours, which has got as its top priority to stamp out these pay gaps, if your organisation can't eliminate these pay gaps, how on earth can we expect every other organisation in the country and every other employer in the country to have eliminated these pay gaps?
Can I just come back to you on that? And thank you very much. We do actually know corporately know those figures and have looked at them, despite the fact that I didn't know them off by heart. We are aware, obviously, of those gaps, and we have undertaken an audit, and we understand the reasons for those. And everybody here, obviously, is aware that the causes for pay gaps are complex. We are undertaking some very significant research in this area, and we will be publishing that shortly, looking at what we found out to be sort of broader causation of pay gaps generally. And what will make this work unique is that actually we are looking at it from a perspective of race and disability as well as gender.
So what are reasons for these pay gaps in your organisation?
Well, on a detailed basis, I'm very happy to provide that information to you separately. I wouldn't like to go into details at this point that's going to look at individual cases. That doesn't feel appropriate. But the work that we are doing is going to look at bringing about practical action to achieve change in that place, and that is an important part of our work going forward.
And just the other thing on this is that the figures that you provided in the past to me when I've asked for these figures have been the mean earnings. I spoke to the Office of National Statistics about the gender pay gap, and they produce the figures mean and median, but think that median, the ONS think median is much more a much more sensible measure than mean. So why do you produce them in mean when the ONS think that the most meaningful figure is median?
I have to say that predates my appointment. I think those are very good challenges which I will take away and look at. I think, as I said right at the start, we are going through a staff reorganisation. Eliminating the pay gap has been one of our considerations, and we clearly need to do better. But we need to be, as I said, an exemplar organisation and eradicate the gap where we can.
Suggest the Commission write to us on this, because I think Philip's raised an extremely important point, and particularly given that the disability pay gap over the last 3 years has gone up so significantly. I think this is something which we would, I think, really value more of an insight into.
Your reasons as to why you have these pay gaps, that would be. And just finally, if I might, Madam Chairman, I just wondered how many complaints you'd had, say, over the last, well, since you'd come into being, by members of your own staff for race discrimination, sex discrimination and disability discrimination. How many complaints have been made by your own staff to you as an organisation under those discrimination headings?
As an organisation, or
yes, as an organisation. No, as an organisation. Since you've come into.
I don't know. I'm happy to find out and let the committee know.
Well, again, you'd think you know these things. I mean, you're supposed to be there to stamp out any kind of discrimination in the workplace, and you don't seem to have any handle as to how many complaints you have in your own organisation about these things.
Sorry, I was going to say, can I respond? Because we are like many public sector organisations in the sense that in any workplace you cannot completely eradicate challenges which may be made by members of your staff. I think the point that you make is well made, because we clearly need to be an exemplar employer, because we are telling other employers in the country that they must adhere to standards which clearly we need to adhere to ourselves. But I think to imagine that we would not have claims over the last 10 years sets a very high bar, and inevitably any organisation, however well run it is, ends up with a number of those claims, but we must obviously do our best to minimise them.
But you don't think if you're lecturing everybody else in the country about all of these things that you should be setting a high example?
I would use a different verb. I don't think we're lecturing people. I think we are working with evidence to try and drive change in accordance with our statutory duties.
I also think it's very important to have appropriate processes so that those challenges can be made, and that any concerns and distress and upset can be properly discussed to be able to move to a resolution. And I think that you might be more concerned if you found an organisation where there were no challenges and there were no proper channels and there were no ability to be able to arrive at a better understanding of any particular situation. And that is the place that we would encourage any other organisation to arrive at.
Well, again, if you could supply us with the information and any perhaps payoffs that you've had to make on for those cases, that would be very helpful.
Within the bounds of confidentiality, yes.
Don't need to know who the people are.
I think it's an important part of the scrutiny process, so I think that would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, we will.
Can we move on? We're talking about the operating model, we're talking about the organisation. Tracy, I know